So we looked at the bell ringer already, and today, as you can see up here in the agenda, we will look at the Constitution, which is in the Government 2 module. We'll talk about the change that will happen because of the weak government that existed in the beginning, and then you'll have some time to continue some of those other activities if you need the time to do so. When you click on that, you'll see that there is a document that you will make a copy of. So make sure that you click make a copy. And when you do, you see it's set up a little bit different than the other documents. There'll be two different types of instructions that will occur. Either you will be asked to highlight certain terms, nouns and verbs, adjectives that are important. For instance, if you look, I already have the first one done, Article 1, Section 1. It says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. So I highlighted the important terms there: legislative powers, Congress, Senate, and House of Representatives. And the reason why I limited it to nouns, verbs, and I also included adjectives there was when you highlight, you obviously don't need to highlight things like prepositions and articles. So you don't need to highlight of the or herein or shall be or stuff like that. So just concentrate on the most important things. There's no need to highlight entire sentences in most cases. And then section 2, it shows you the other thing that might come up. There'll be a numbered list, and so you just need to type in the significant items from that section. And I already did number 1 for you there for section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year. So they have 2-year terms is a significant point that you could type in there. And so this just goes through the different parts of the original Constitution. It does not have, it does have a list of the Bill of Rights, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But for now, Articles 1 through 7 are what you should be concentrating on from the actual Constitution. Does anybody have any questions about that? Anything at all? Okay. So go ahead and read through that. Obviously, these are excerpts. I didn't include 100% of the text because that would take way too long. And if there are words that you come across that you're not familiar with, please feel free to look them up, Google them. That's perfectly fine if you do come across that situation. So today in the notes, we'll look at why the change was needed to move to the Constitution. We yesterday talked about how the relationship broke down and we eventually declared independence. And so today we'll talk about how we move toward getting a constitution itself. The first government of the United States, the first subsection up there, is the Articles of Confederation, and that was our first government. And like any confederation, it was simply a loose alliance. That was all it was, sometimes referred to as the League of Friendship. So it really didn't have a lot of structure or formality to it compared to other systems. It was created in 1777, so it existed throughout the War for Independence. So one of the reasons why it took us a while to create the Constitution is because first we had to get done with this war. And that war lasted for a number of years, from 1775 the whole way up through 1781. So it lasted for a considerable period of time. And then, of course, the treaty needed to be signed. So we had other things on our mind. But the one body that it did set up was the Continental Congress. So the Continental Congress would be the the actual governing body. Not that it could. Continental Congress, yes, like continental breakfast.
I kept hearing a C in there, and I have no.
The Continental Congress.
Mental?
Huh?
I keep hearing a C in there, and I don't know why. It's fine.
Continental Congress?
Okay, there we go.
So only had a legislative branch. There'd be no executive and no judicial. So only a legislative branch. There was a president of the Congress, but they weren't the president of the United States. So there was no executive. There was no Supreme Court or federal court system. There was none of that. Most of the governing was carried out by the states under their own constitutions. So the states had their own constitutions, a list of duties of the government. And each of those states also had their own Bill of Rights as well. So each state was kind of like its own little country that just happened to be in a league with the other states. The second night up there, weaknesses. So let's look at some of the weaknesses. One would be is the economy declined after the war. The economy declined. Lots of money was borrowed. Lots of people left their homes and farms to fight in the war. And so afterwards, it took quite a time to rebuild. We had at least $50 million worth of debt. And the states continued to print money. And in economics, we'll talk about why printing money actually decreases its value, so it becomes worthless. So printing too much money. And then, of course, not only did the United States, this loose alliance, have $50 million worth of debt, but individuals had debt too. Many people who went off to fight in a war as soldiers put off paying, for instance, the loan that they had for their farm or their home, or borrowed money to send back to their family to get by. And so there's a lot of private debt as well. Since we had cast off the King of England and no longer had to follow under the British system, a lot of the states encouraged people to become more involved in government. However, when they did that, they talked about just canceling all the debt that exists. The problem is that when you do that, of course, is that no one in the future will want to loan you money. So a lot of the wealthy worried about the influence of average people. And some specific structural weaknesses. One would be that there was only one vote per state, no matter what size. So Virginia, which is bigger geographically and had the biggest population at the time, got the same amount of votes as Rhode Island, one vote. Congress could not collect taxes, which you might think, oh, that must have been a good thing. But remember, they have all this debt to pay off. So how were they ever going to do that? So Congress could not collect taxes. They could not regulate trade. And so each of the 13 states was going to go and make its own trade deals, creating a confusing, inefficient system. So Congress could not regulate trade.
Like two states promising they could go down the same strait.
Something like that, but more or less deals they were making with other countries and things of that nature. Amendments needed unanimous approval. So, in order to change the articles, you needed all 13 states to approve, which was unlikely. So, unanimous approval. And then just to pass regular laws, you needed 9 out of 13 states, which meant that very few laws were going to be passed, which you might think, oh, that must be a good thing. But remember, this is a new nation. We had to set up a system. We had to establish order and revive the economy. So there was certainly a need to pass laws, but that was difficult to get over that hurdle of 9 out of 13. So the last one up there is first attempt. We would make our first attempt at changing. First attempt at changing. The first attempt we would have at changing will be called the Annapolis Convention in 1786. The Annapolis Convention, yes.
Spell Annapolis, please.
Yes, I can. Annapolis. That's Annapolis. Now, the Annapolis Convention in 1786 is where the nationalists would come together. The nationalists. These are people that want to create an American nation. They don't want 13 separate states. They want an America. They didn't like the fact that there seemed to be a lack of a national plan. So they thought we needed some kind of national plan. And many would write to newspapers advocating for this, saying that we needed the change. They included men like George Washington, a Virginia veteran. How'd you know he was the commander of the American forces during the war?
He wrote George Washington.
So George Washington, Virginia veteran. James Madison, who studied governments. He's the one that brought forward probably the most information about some of the civilizations we looked at in the first unit, like Athens and Rome and Britain. So James Madison was basically an expert on government. Alexander Hamilton was a New Yorker that believed in a strong government. In fact, he even flirted with the idea of making George Washington king. And one last one would be Benjamin Franklin, who's still alive at this point. He's one of the older ones. and he is known for compromising. So Ben Franklin and compromising. So they knew they had to make some kind of change. They just weren't sure what exactly. They were worried about people not paying back their debts. They were worried about people challenging authority. First it was the king, but what would it be next? And they know that other attempts at people governing themselves, like Athens and the Roman Republic, didn't last forever. So when Annapolis occurred, only 5 states would end up sending delegates because of all these difficulties. And the only thing that these delegates from the 5 states could agree on was that they needed to meet again the next year. So that would be in 1787, and they would meet in the same city that the Declaration of Independence was created in, and that would be the city of Philadelphia in Independence Hall.
What year?
They would meet again the next year in 1787. And the reason why they would end up meeting, the last thing I'll mention, is because of Shays' Rebellion. Exactly what they were afraid of would happen. In between the Annapolis and Philadelphia conventions, a man by the name of Daniel Shays, Shays, would be upset that his home was going to be seized because he wasn't paying off his debts. And so he, Shays, so he and a group of his friends would basically rise up, start a rebellion to stop the banks, to stop the sheriff's office from seizing property. It was easily put down, but it obviously revealed the biggest fears that America was going to descend into chaos. So that would encourage more states to send delegates to the next convention in Philadelphia. Tomorrow we'll finish up the notes by looking at the Constitutional Convention. For the remainder of the day, you can continue to work on the Constitution activity or the reading for the Government 2 unit. Don't forget the quizzes. They're posted. You can take them twice. Take the quizzes twice. Don't forget about those. So whatever you'd like to work on at this time, please do so. I'll put the time up on the screen, and then the last 5 minutes we'll go to the chat to type in something that you learned today.